Now, there is a country which is famous for its liberalism. I mean, you can do anything there, and nobody will arrest you. Most likely, if you decide to go naked in the middle of Copenhagen, they'll just go. You understand? If you are two homosexuals and you want to get married, whatever you want to do, you can what? You can do. It's a wonderfully free and open country, and certainly famous for its milk and cheese, but now more famous for its liberalism. In fact, Denmark is one of the most prosperous countries in the world, and Copenhagen is the second most expensive city in the world. When I go to Copenhagen, I generally watch my hands because they may get a little rubbed up in dishwashing since I can't pay the bills, I mean, as I go through the town. So it's a wonderful place. It's a free and liberal place. And there is a newspaper in Copenhagen or in Denmark, because any newspaper in Copenhagen, given the size of this country, is what? In Denmark. It's called the Jutland Post. And it's well known and famous in Denmark, at least, if not around the world. It's famous for its adventurous nature. It has a culture editor by the name of Flemming Rose. Or it had a culture editor, please. It had a culture editor by the name of Flemming Rose. And Flemming Rose came up with an idea. Since Denmark is the land of freedom, where you can say anything and nobody, blinks an eyelash, and that is the people who are what I would call historically Danish. Then he said, what we need to do, because in Europe now, there are all these Muslim people protesting all these liberal things. From gay marriage, do you understand, to abortion, whatever it be, and they're always protesting. What we need to do is to affirm freedom of speech. So we contacted 25 cartoonists. I don't know how many cartoonists there are in Denmark. There can't be that many cartoonists in Denmark. 25 is a pretty big part of it. He contacted 25 cartoonists, and he said, I want you to do cartoons, maybe outrageous cartoons, about Islam and Mohammed. 12 volunteered. And so there emerged 12 cartoons, and the 12 cartoons were printed in the Jutland Post on September 30th, 2005. They didn't arouse a great deal of interest in Denmark because Denmark, was Mohammed walking around naked in the cartoon? And what was in there that was going to bother anybody? So they had one cartoon, had Mohammed with a bomb in his turban. There was one cartoon with Mohammed rushing from the gates of heaven as people are approaching, saying, stop, we've run out of virgins. I mean. Some of them were pretty funny. But for the Danes, however, in Denmark, there are 200,000 Muslims. They have recently been admitted to that country. And in fact, they're quite lucky because when they got there, they found themselves attached to the Scandinavian welfare system almost immediately. One of their leaders noticed the cartoons and was absolutely outraged. And what he proceeded to do was to mail them all over the Muslim world. in particular to imams and mullahs who are concerned about Muslim orthodoxy, who know that strict Muslim law forbids any portrayal of Muhammad. That is, Islam, when it got organized, wished to show its difference from Christianity. It did not wish Muhammad to be turned into a god. There is only God. You can't represent God either. But you must not confuse Muhammad with God. So, no portrayal of Muhammad. And in fact, there's no portrayal of any human figure in Islam, in strict Islam. It corresponds to what is to be found in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible forbids portraits. You can make a picture of a flower, but you can't make a picture of a person or an animal. So the Arab tradition, the Muslim tradition, corresponds to the Jewish tradition. Both have their roots in what we call this Semitic religion that came out of the desert. So no pictures. So he mails these cartoons to these people. I mean, no pictures is one thing, but the pictures they got. We've run out of virgins. They were appalled and outraged. They saw it as another attempt of Westerners to humiliate the Muslims, to knock the Muslims, to poke fun at the Muslims. And so, it took a while. The cartoons appeared in Denmark on September the 30th. The outrage in the Muslim world did not appear in the form of riots until February the 3rd, 2006. So the riots on February the 3rd were a response to what had happened on September the 30th, and now all hell breaks loose. The Muslim leaders who've received the cartoons now proceed to mobilize their students and their friends, and they go out in the streets and they start burning Danish flags. And then, since they assume that Denmark is connected in some way to America or Israel, they burn American flags and Israeli flags. They then attack Danish embassies. In Tehran and in Beirut, they burn down the Danish embassy. And then they institute a boycott against Danish products, which, quite frankly, is healthy. I mean, stop eating cheese. No. A boycott against Danish products, whatever, I mean, and now on TV in America, we're watching the what? The riots go on, the screaming. Well, the Danes were appalled. I mean, for them, it's a cartoon. You can make fun of anything. You can make fun of Muhammad. You can make fun of Jesus. Most Danes don't even go to church. They only show up in church one day a year if they have a relative involved, generally in June, for confirmation. It's the Danish bar mitzvah. No. And they show up for that, but that's about it. They're very secular. So poke fun at Mohammed, poke fun at Jesus, poke fun at Moses. Who cares? And they're appalled that these people to whom they gave their hospitality, do you understand, with the welfare system, are now screaming. And not only that, over the last 10 years, the Danish press, which had been pro-Israeli, had, by virtue of, in quotation marks, the sufferings of the Palestinians, moved over to the Palestinian side. And having done all of that, these people are screaming. So now comes the reaction. The reaction is anger. Who do you think you are telling us what we can publish? So out of that came what we call a sympathy publication by other newspapers around Europe. François in Paris, printed the cartoons. In Switzerland, they printed the cartoons. In Spain, they printed the cartoons. In Germany, they reprinted the cartoons. In Austria, they reprinted the cartoons. Strangely enough, a sympathetic liberal Muslim reprinted them in Jordan. So there. You are not going to shut down our free speech. We will not be intimidated by you. Who do you think you are? And not only that, you're a bunch of hypocrites. After all, look at the cartoons in the Muslim world. They produce cartoons about Jews that are beyond belief. They're like cartoons that Julius Streicher might have composed for his newspaper in Nuremberg during the Hitler era. Now that's okay. And they have cartoons mocking American culture, overwhelmingly disgusting. That's okay. But we can't do the reverse. We don't object to their cartoons. We may object to the content of their cartoons, but we assume they have the right to publish them. So, honor our right. Well, they're screaming at each other. The Danes in Copenhagen, and the Muslims in Karachi, in Gaza, in Beirut, in Tehran. It doesn't make any difference, and neither side is convincing the other. What we are now confronting is what I would call a total incompatibility. A breakdown of communication, a barrier that most likely cannot be crossed between two cultures. On the one side is traditional Muslim culture. On the other side is not traditional Christian culture. On the other side is secular liberal culture. Got the two cultures? So in order to evaluate what is going on and to figure out how does one respond to this whole thing, I have to talk to you about the two cultures. So I'm going to start with the culture of free speech. The culture of free speech is called secular liberal culture. Secular liberal culture arose in Europe, in Western Europe. It began, if you will, in a Europe which was overwhelmingly Christian and traditional. If we go back 300 or 400 years, that's what we encounter. In this world, in the Christian world, there was no freedom of speech. And in the Jewish world, there was what? No freedom of speech. It's not that the Muslims invented it all by themselves. All traditional religions forbade freedom of speech for a very simple reason. If they were salvation religions, and Rabbinic Judaism and Islam and Christianity were, then they have a message There is something available to everybody. It is called salvation. And there's one path to it. And we're giving you the information about the one path. If we allow other people to give you information about their path, you may what? Take it and end up in hell. So how can we allow free speech? And before we get self-righteous, and I've mentioned this on previous occasions, I'm in favor of shutting up the tobacco companies. I believe the path to hell is using tobacco. Do you understand? And I want it off the billboards, and I want it off the magazines, and I want it out of the schools. Well, you're interfering with free speech, Sherwin. Health is more important than free speech. So I am willing, do you understand, to do, I mean, you have to understand this. Depends on the issue. For the people in traditional religion, they have a path to ultimate health. You got to get to the right place, and then you will what? Remain healthy forever. And if you get the wrong information, you may take the wrong path, and it may result in your self-destruction. So there's no free speech. Rabbinic Judaism didn't have free speech. Traditional Christianity doesn't have free speech. So it was no different in Europe from the way it was in the Muslim world. And in Denmark, in the 16th century, it was the same as it is in Karachi, because they did burn heretics in Denmark. Now, there were obviously two sins that free speech might lead you to. The first sin is called heresy. Heresy is false doctrine. That indeed you claim that a path is the real path, which is not the real path. All right? The other is called blasphemy. Blasphemy is when you remove the dignity of God and his deputies. There are things in this world that are sacred. They are untouchable. You may not touch them, and you may not harm them. And in many cases, they are the defense of the dignity of those who made and run the universe. And so, there are certain words you can't use when you curse. There are certain pictures you cannot draw. See, blasphemy in a secular age is very hard to understand. Ho-hum. What are they talking about? Well, let me take blasphemy with regard to the family. Your neighbor draws a picture of your grandmother who's living with you naked and puts it up. Do you understand? Free speech. And puts it up, do you understand, on the roof. And you say, well, it's free speech. Right? Hey, Grandma, don't go outside today. You see, our problem often trying to understand this is we don't think we have any limitations. It's them. Can't they take a joke? Well, some things aren't funny. My grandmother naked in a portrait over somebody's house is what? Not funny. It's funny to people not members of the family. Right, sure, oh, that's very funny, very funny. That's blasphemy. You have taken away her what? Her dignity. You have humiliated her, and you have humiliated her family. And I don't know anybody in my neighborhood who would dare to do that. And if somebody dared to do that, I am sure the person who felt offended would go to the courts. No, I just. Do you understand blasphemy? Blasphemy is different from heresy. Heresy is the wrong doctrine. Blasphemy is assaulting the sacred, humiliating sacred figures. Well, the church in Europe punished both heresy and blasphemy with death. That was the penalty. That's how serious it was viewed. Now, what happened in Europe was the Great Rebellion. It's a rebellion that did not take place in the Muslim world, but it took place in the Christian world. It was not a Christian rebellion. It was actually a rebellion against the church and the clergy. It started with the Renaissance. It moved into the Enlightenment. By the 18th century, there were thousands and thousands of people, most of them fairly well educated, who were saying that the ideas promoted by the church are silly. And in fact, we need to be more rational. For a while, they were persecuted. But by the middle of the 18th century, they found so many followers, including people in high places, including bishops, that in fact, destroying them became impossible. Voltaire was expelled from France, and then what? He came back a hero because, he was the man of the hour. The time had come. The economy had changed. Urbanization had begun. Education in schools had been improved, and something that we call secular education had already been introduced. So now there was a public. And out of it would come an idea. We now got people who are religious, but now we have people who are what? Not religious. So why don't we create a society so that we don't kill each other? Why don't we make a society in which everybody can what? Say what they want, and then they won't get punished. So out of that emerged two revolutions that championed freedom of speech. One is called the American Revolution. The American Revolution is a product of the Enlightenment, the rebellion against traditional Christian values. And in fact, the founding fathers were, to a large degree, radicals. They were figures of the Enlightenment. They did not represent the masses of Christian people in the world. They represented a small elite which was to be found in both England, Western Europe, and in America. And out of it came the Constitution of the United States of America, in particular the Bill of Rights, which guaranteed freedom of speech. And then came the glorious revolution in a much more powerful country at that time. It's called France. It's called the French Revolution. And now the church is overthrown. The church is disestablished. And now there's a French constitution that's written. The king will ultimately lose his head together with his wife. And now the Constitution says freedom of speech. Now, it was easy to say. I do want to say that from the beginning, there were limitations. Robespierre, who was one of the drafters of freedom of speech, when he got in power, what? Shut his opposition up. In fact, he often chopped off their heads. That is generally what is meant is, I like my speech, but I don't like your speech. Since you're not allowing me to speak, I want you to allow me to speak. And once you allow me to speak and I don't like your speech, I proceed to do exactly what my enemies had done to me. So even in this Western world, with this incredible change, there appeared the limitations. I assure you that in the early American Republic, in the days of Thomas Jefferson, you could not draw a cartoon mocking Jesus. Do you understand? You couldn't do that. You would have a mob in the what? You would have a mob in the street. And most likely it would have been prevented for reasons of public disorder. Couldn't do it. Most likely, you couldn't have done cartoons in 1805 mocking the great prophets or the great teachers of the Old Testament. That would have been a kind of blasphemy that even the new liberalism would never have allowed. I do want to tell you that developing an immunity to being offended, since most people are thin-skinned, that's my discovery. All right? Because everybody has a button. Do you know that? Everybody has a button. So, it was most likely the case that there were very accepted limitations. You could say certain things you couldn't say before, but you could not say everything. And the reason was not only that you were committing some kind of blasphemy against the public order. It was called preventing public disorder. Nobody burned American flags in 1815. Do you know that? I mean, burning an American flag and then jumping up and down on it? I mean, unacceptable. Does it say free speech, free expression in the Constitution? Yes, but you know there are limits. Pornography in 1820? Louisville, Kentucky. Never. Did people imagine they were in favor of free speech? Yes, free speech meant we have Presbyterians, we've got what? We've got disciples of Christ, we've got Episcopalians, we even have some Jews. Fine, that's all. We already accept it. That's it, fine, thank you very much. But naked people on billboards? Even in my childhood, I want to tell you, because I still remember the big hoo-ha with Jane Russell. Do you remember? Did we think we were in favor of free speech? Yes. Did we have obvious limitations? Yes. Well, so, free speech has come to us through an intellectual elite that became the leaders of a revolution. It is very new. There is no history of free speech anywhere before modern times. Never. Those who speak falsely against what is regarded as what is sacred to the community are to be eliminated. So about 250 years ago, a few people in Western Europe managed to what? To arrange for this. So are people historically and temperamentally prepared for it? Is it that we're naturally attuned to free speech, and when people don't practice it, obviously they're peculiar? No. It's new. And I do want to tell you, very fragile. And our championing of it is always exposed as hypocrisy because each one of us has a button. You press it, and we want to shut them up. Well, now let me give you Islam. Islam, like all traditional religions, starts out as an authoritarian system. All truth is to be contained in what we call the official scriptures of Islam. There is the Quran, there is the Hadith, which is the supplement to the Quran, there is the Sharia, which is the law, which is derived from the Hadith and the Quran, and then there are the official interpreters of these documents. They are the clergy. They are called imams, mullahs, whatever it be, ayatollahs. I mean, there you are. They speak the truth. They are the deputies of God. The only one who really knows the truth is God, and God has revealed the truth to us. He has not given us the right to speak falsehood, because speaking falsehood is too dangerous. So from the beginning, we have in Islam this traditional authoritarian system, and there was from the beginning repression. Once the armies of Islam went their way, especially in the Arabian Peninsula, they destroyed all competing religions. I mean, the same thing happened in the Hebrew Bible. I mean, in Deuteronomy chapter 7. When you cross over into the promised land, you shall destroy all their sanctuaries. You shall even eliminate the idol worshippers. Oh, that's it. Because they will lead your children astray. So, got this? I mean, there is this. And the repression for heresy or blasphemy, the penalty is very clear. It's not a minor crime. It's worthy of death. You know, I sometimes think of myself, how do I feel about people who would, if they bought billboard space and were advertising dangerous drugs? Buy your heroin, Woodward and whatever. Would I want to kill them? I'd be mad. Do you understand? I would be provoked. Or as Akim Tamarov said, and for whom the bell tolls, provoked. All right, fine. And then in the Muslim world, actually, in the 9th and 10th century, there appeared a period of relaxation. It's very interesting. It came because of affluence and because of urbanization. The most relaxed part of the Muslim world was on the Silk Route, because that's it. Urbanization, middle class, affluence, leisure time, the whole thing, education, etc. The Silk Route, as you know, went from Beijing all the way to Europe. Marco Polo took it, all right? And at the middle of it is where you exchange goods. The Chinese stopped, and they picked up the European goods, and the Europeans picked up the what? The Chinese goods, and the name of that place was Samarkand, Bukhara, the great place. Now, what is very interesting about that place during this period of time in the Muslim world is that the Muslim rulers didn't listen to the Muslim clergy. And because, in the interest of trade, they wanted to encourage comfort in speech, they allowed a certain level of free speech. And something came out of it that always surprised me. One of the most famous Muslim poets is one that I had to study in the 11th grade at Central High School, translated by Edward Fitzgerald, an Englishman. His name was Umar Khayyam. Does anybody remember? A jug of wine and a loaf of bread, you beside me in the wilderness, sex, wine. Wine is illegal. How could a Muslim poet get away, get published? Who said that? He basically says there's no afterlife and just have pleasure right now. Enjoy yourself. And he got away with it. He was not killed. Well, he lived in that area. And what we know is there was a period of time in the Muslim world when there was relaxation. In fact, during that time, portraits of Muhammad were painted. You can see that in the Persian world, which is next to the Silk Route. There appeared at this time things called Persian miniatures. Now, they're theoretically illegal in Islam because they're what? They're portraits of people, but they were tolerated. You're seeing a kind of new environment. There's some kind of toleration. Could they have tolerated the cartoons about Muhammad? I don't know. But they could tolerate somebody who mocked the basic doctrines of Islam. But I do want to tell you, that period ended very quickly. There was like a window for about 250 years in a particular area of the Muslim world, and then it was closed. What was the cause of the closing? Well, the rise of the fanatic clergy again. What made the clergy so fanatic? Well, there was an ongoing war. War will do it, won't it? Now you have an enemy. There were two enemies. On the west was the Christian world, and the war was continuous. The Muslims attacked the Christian world. They took part of it in the 7th century and the 8th century AD. They reached the borders of Spain. They took Spain. They were heading for France, where they invaded Europe. And then later on, they invaded through the Balkans. The Turks took Constantinople. There was this war, and it was fierce. Well, when you have war, you generally reduce what? War shrinks freedom. Because you've got a what? An enemy. We all have to stick together. We need certain levels of conformity. So whatever this wonderful period produced is canceled out. The second war is the war with the Hindus. Because on the Eastern Front, the Muslims are invading India. And India is loaded with statues and pictures. You have to smash them. So they proceeded to do it. Do you remember what the Taliban did to the statues of Buddha in Afghanistan? No, they blew them up. So now you got war. Interestingly enough, in the conquest of India, there was a ruler. This period lasted for about 60 years. His name was Akbar. And he was the Muslim ruler of India. They were called the Mughals because they were descended from the Mongols. All right. And Akbar, if you go as a tourist to India and you take the usual triangle short trip from New Delhi to Agra, Agra to Jaipur, Jaipur to New Delhi, between Agra and Jaipur, you come to a ruin, Fatehpur Sikri. And at Fatehpur Sikri, that was the capital built by Akbar, and Akbar invited Hindus, Muslim scholars. The principle was, we'll all sit around and we'll talk, you can say anything. But his son, Aurangzeb, canceled out what his father started. He was the man, fight for Islam, jihad, the whole thing, the end. So we have two periods here, right? That's it. And in fact, the war with both the Christians and the Hindus, one on the west and one on the east, intensified this period of hostility to freedom. We got to stick together. So whatever freedom there was goes. And then comes the worst enemy of all. The worst enemy of all arrived in the form of Europeans, who were nominally Christian, but who were now in what I call the post-Christian age. The post-Christian age is when you belong to a religious institution, but you rarely go. No, I mean, it's there, but it's not overwhelmingly important, and you have alternative things to do and alternative things to study. Basically, what happened to Western Europe as a result of all the change I described is that it became secularized. So when the English and the French and the Dutch arrived in the Muslim world to conquer it, they weren't bringing Christianity. They were bringing capitalism. Well, capitalism is built on the market. The market is built on the idea. You make something, you say something. Does somebody want to buy it? Does somebody want to what? Read it. The market fit the whole notion of what we call free speech, right? You don't like it? Don't buy it. You don't want to hear it? Don't hear it. You choose. Oh. Now, for us, the market is, since we're so addicted to shopping, the market, choosing in the market is, do you understand? That's all we do. That's what we do. We understand it. So that's the idea, and that's the antithesis of traditional Christianity. The Christian world of Europe and North America is transformed by the notion of the market, the free market. Throw it out. Whoever wants it, fine. Nobody wants it? Finished. Well, what did that mean? Well, that meant that you could choose to be religious or not religious. And in fact, most of the people the Muslim world encountered were not religious, in the sense that they were religious. If you ask these people, are you Christian? They would say what? Yes. If you watch their behavior, so now you're dealing with secular people. And the Muslim world is outraged. There are women who are deciding to what? Walk out in public in the Muslim world with their ankles exposed. Well, you don't have to look, do you? If she wants to do it, she wants. She wants to do it. And there are people publishing books in the Western world that are translated into Arabic and Persian, which recommend lifestyles that would make Mohammed's hair stand straight up. Well, they don't understand the market. I mean, there is a bazaar. But the market is a bigger, do you understand? The market's a bigger idea. Don't understand it, doesn't fit into their culture. It's not traditionally Christian, it's not traditionally Jewish, it's not traditionally Hindu, and it's not traditionally Muslim. And they're absolutely outraged because secular culture is one long heresy. It's one thing to be Christian, to say, I believe in God, and I think the path of salvation is to be found in the New Testament, as opposed to the Quran. It's another thing to say, I'm not interested in God. Oh. So the Muslim world is now assaulted by an enemy, traditional Islam, that they can't even understand. And in fact, the enemy has an idea which they think is just rational. Make whatever you want and say whatever you want, and what? Whoever wants to hear it will hear it. Whoever wants to buy it will buy it. Inconceivable. You mean I can say anything, even things that are false, that are hated by God himself, and I'm supposed to sit by and say to everybody, well, you don't want to listen? Don't listen. Unacceptable. Outrage. The encounter of the Muslim world with the secular, liberal culture of the free enterprise economy was worse than even the encounter with Christianity or Hinduism. It undermined the credibility of what they stood for. There is no equality between what any whippersnapper says and what God says. How can there be equality? Now, if you're raised in what I call the free market culture, it's very hard to understand. That's it. That's why there's no communication. No communication. So now let me give you the provocations. Right. Provocation coming from this secular liberal culture. Women who think they're in charge of their life, please. And say so publicly. Second provocation. Homosexuals who think they have the right to lead their lifestyle publicly and even to have their unions with other homosexuals saying, ooh. Provocation, because those magazines are shipped to the Muslim world. And I do want to tell you, Muslim men generally like them in secret. No, it's called pornography. Yeah. I mean, there's what we call sophisticated pornography, that's Playboy. But then there's what? There's unsophisticated pornography. So there it is, it's shipped out. Whenever you open one of those magazines, you say, you know, that's somebody's daughter. No, do you understand that? So how does the family? and there she is. It's all right. An anonymous woman, it's one thing. So the provocations are overwhelming, and can you see how the communication between these two cultures would be very difficult? It isn't like, don't you get it? They can't talk to each other because the Muslim world has never gone through those secular revolutions which produced free speech. There is such disinterest in religion in Europe. Do you understand? You could draw a picture of Jesus doing some kind of sexual act, and people, oh, they have them in the museums. Now, what has happened in Europe in particular, but also in North America, that there is a new confrontation, which is a more intense confrontation with the secular world. Because in the one case, the secular liberal world comes to the Muslim world. Well, it's a big world, and if you want to hide up in a mountain village somewhere, you don't have to be exposed to it. But over the last 40 years, in Europe first, and now in North America, there is a new immigration. The aging of population in Europe, a dramatic aging of the population, means they need young people to do menial work. So they have allowed large numbers of people from the Muslim world to come to Europe. First in small numbers, then in large numbers. And now they're all over the place. They're in France, 6 million out of 50 million. They're in Germany. They're all over Italy. They're everywhere in Spain. Everywhere there is prosperity. The only country they don't want to go to in Europe is Russia. So if you don't want Muslim immigrants, keep your economy bad. Do you understand? They won't come. If you stay poor, you won't get immigrants. It's a rule. Because I hear all these people complaining, and I say, well, you could give up your house and your travel and the whole thing, and become poor. We all were poor. They won't come. So now they're pouring in. And in fact, now they're moving into the centers of secular liberal culture. And in fact, secular liberal culture has a mantra. Our country is open to everybody, of all thoughts, doesn't make any difference, all races. Oh. Now, if I were a Muslim immigrant, the place I would want to go to, even though it's a little cold, but the welfare system is extraordinary, is Scandinavia. There's no doubt about it. I only take short trips there because who can afford to stay there for any length of time? So Denmark, got it, Sweden, and Norway. Norway in particular. The most expensive city in the world today is Oslo, bar none. The second most expensive city in the world is Copenhagen. So it's a good place. No, it's good. So if they'll let you in, and in fact, these people are famous for their liberalism. One of the reasons why they're so liberal is they have homogeneous populations. So now these homogeneous populations invite, do you understand, people of radically different culture into their midst, and now they have strange experiences. The few immigrants that were allowed into Scandinavia before, who came generally within 2 weeks, took a course in Danish, Swedish, or Norwegian. Right? They integrated into the school system, and in fact, over a short period of time, although they were not as blonde as the Scandinavians, they were what? They were integrated. Not anymore. So now they come in. They can't just integrate into the culture because secular liberal culture is so opposed to the values of that system. They could more easily fit into a traditional Christian culture, but not secular liberal culture, which is the culture all over Western Europe. I mean, they have trouble. And one of the things that bother them, I mean, you have to understand, they're taking their kids to school or whatever it be. There are these billboards in Scandinavia with naked women. No, they've got naked women all over the billboards. So, walk like this, I don't know. So, just walking down the street is already a cause for outrage. How can they allow it? What kind of values? God hates women who do that. So the only way, basically, to function in this culture is you have to hide yourself. You have to live in a segregated community where you bump into each other, where your women are sheltered, and where the men may go out and pretend not to look, whatever it is. So the chance of assimilating these people in a short time is very small. And in fact, since they live segregated lives, their ability to pick up the native language is limited. There are only 5 million people in Denmark. They do not have a fantastic birth rate. They're affluent. And now the Muslims are 200,000 or close to 300,000, and they multiply very fast. So now, just figure this out over time. So now you've got a real confrontation. And what outraged the Danes in this particular case was that they had welcomed these people into the country. They were offering them the opportunity to become Danes. Well, what they mean to become Danes is to become secular. Why can't you behave like other Danish people? So go to confirmation once a year and enjoy the cartoons. So now a question arises. It's a very big question. Since obviously these people can riot, do you practice discretion? Discretion does not use the government. On the books, it says what? Freedom of speech. But you choose not to use provocative cartoons because it will what? Provoke these people, and you'll have public disorder, and you will have alienation and hatred. Now, we all do that in human relations. If each of us told our partners what we're really thinking all the time, do you understand? I'm just trying to tell you. It's called self-censorship. Do we have the right to tell our partners whatever we're thinking? Yes. Do we? Do we tell our friends everything we're thinking? You're too fat. Oh, he's fat. Well, they fix the teeth. We don't. We all practice I want to tell you, we practice self-censorship because otherwise human relations would not take place. And in fact, we practice more of it if we're with a particularly sensitive and volatile person. We do. We're very careful. We have theoretical freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want. You're a boob. But we don't, because human...
When I need you, I just close my eyes and I'm with you. And all that I so wanna give you, it's only a
You don't have to be a hero to be a hero. When you adopt a child from foster care, just being there makes all the difference.
But we don't, because human relations would absolutely break down. There wouldn't be any. See, once we transfer the examples from the world of religion, where people aren't very interested, to what we call secular relationships in the real life that we lead, then we suddenly realize all the self-censorship that goes on. I must say, we live in a world in which We're very careful what we say to other ethnic groups. If whites are engaged in a conversation with blacks, there is a lot of self-censorship, I want to tell you. We don't wish to what? Offend. We don't want to say anything that might in any way, shape, and form what? Offend or demean or what. So we practice all this self-censorship. We don't jump up and down and say every thought that comes into our mind. Do we have the right to do that? Yes. We have the legal right. Do we have the moral right to offend people if it does not serve any public good? You understand the distinction between the two? All right. Well, so the experience of these people is an experience of being humiliated in their environment. Their values, their lifestyles are mocked. Their response is rioting. And then there's the counter response. Let me give you the counter response. The counter response to this is, kick them out. Because obviously you're going to have public disorder. If they increase in number, kick them out. There are political parties all over Europe that wish to kick the immigrants out. The third most successful political party in Denmark now, it was the 10th, it's now the third, the People's Party. They got 13% of the vote in the last election. Want to remove them. They will be a source of public disorder. They don't understand our culture. They can't understand our culture, and all they're doing is they are destroying it and inhibiting it, and that's it. And they are saying the same thing in Holland now. What could be more liberal than Holland? A Muslim assassinated a filmmaker because he dared produce a film about Muslim women that was viewed as blasphemous. So kick them out. So now you've got liberals screaming, kick them out. They feel guilty. No, I mean, they're not used to saying that. They're always used to saying what? Bring them in, bring them in, bring them in. Now they're saying what? Kick them out, kick them out, kick them out. Am I saying that? Not me. I guess it is me. I don't know. So now, let me pose the dilemma. I have alluded to this before, but here it applies overwhelmingly. If you go to the Muslim world and you have them take a vote on free speech as conceived by the Jutland Post in Copenhagen, it will be overwhelmingly rejected. In fact, it would be rejected in most parts of the world. That's called democracy. What free speech is part of is not democracy. It's called liberalism. Liberalism is personal freedom. So, with the Constitution of the United States of America, if most of the people in Georgia want to shut down an atheist organization, they can't. Even if you get 95% of the vote. Because The Bill of Rights in our Constitution is anti-democratic. It's anti-democratic because liberalism is fragile. If you put it to public votes, it most likely will lose. If you consult the mob in most countries, it will what? It will lose. The only way it can be protected is by restraining the mob, by telling the concerned majority they can't have their way. No, that person has the right. Well, so there's a distinction always between democracy and liberalism. Free speech belongs to liberalism. And in fact, in the Muslim world, the only way you ever got free speech was that there were authoritarian governments. Because you need an authoritarian government to hold back the what? The democratic masses who want to take it away. The perfect example of that was the great pioneer who changed Turkey. He modernized Turkey against the will of the people. His name was Kemal Atatürk, right? Turkey was a very Muslim country. He decided he was going to secularize it, and he was going to present an environment in which there would be greater personal freedom. He did not allow denunciations of his regime, but he did, by the way, allow propaganda for feminism. He liked that. He liked feminism. He wanted to modernize the country. Okay, you can write about feminism. And when mobs rioted and whatever else it was against this free speech, he brought in his army. And he put them down. And he said, they will publish. So that raises the question. It's a very important question. If liberalism, in the sense of personal freedom, is new and very fragile, and generally an idea attractive to well-educated, secularized people, how do you guarantee it, and how do you persuade others to endorse it? See, our problem is not simply to denounce the Muslim world. Our project is how do we persuade them to accept it, because they're not going to go away. And if they're not willing to accept it, what do we do? Do you understand? Then what do we do? Do we simply cut off all relations with, do we say, that's it? Do it our way or the highway? That was the response that came out of Denmark. Do it our way or the what? The highway. Well, why don't you think about it for about 5 minutes, and then come back and we'll talk about it. Okay, good. With morality. There are two kinds of morality. It may be an oversimplification, but when I talk about moral philosophy, there are two kinds. One is what we call absolute. There are certain principles which are absolute. Certainly, for many people in the last 2 centuries, those absolute principles are incorporated in what we call individual rights. My right to be in charge of my life, my right to say, they become the foundation of political morality. My right to be in charge of my own body, or whatever, whatever it be, okay? Well, if they're absolute, then there's no compromise. You simply say, our society is giving expression to an absolute moral principle. And in fact, we cannot compromise. So if you don't wish to participate in it, out. And obviously, secular liberal culture has within it certain principles that many people in it regard as absolute. Like most of the women that I know, if I said to them, no, you don't have an absolute right over your whole body. Right? The second form of moral philosophy is called consequentialism. Consequentialism maintains that things are right or wrong depending on their consequences. How do they affect human beings? Because absolutists don't care. They're rioting in the streets, they're all killing, thousands of people are getting killed, we don't care. We have the what? We have the right. Good. And it is the job of the government to defend that right. And if I have the right to say whatever I want to say, then I have the right to say whatever I want to say, and I will say whatever I want to say. And I intend the authorities to protect me and defend me, and to denounce those people who try to take that right away from me, or try to abuse my right. The consequentialist says, when you judge the moral value of something, you have to look at the consequences. How does it affect the people who are part of the scene? And you have various criteria that you check. If the defense of my rights results in everybody getting killed, is that a justifiable consequence? If the defense of my right results in thousands of people getting harmed, do you understand? One of the consequences is called survival. We can develop a system in which people can so offend each other that mutual survival becomes impossible. Well, we could. We can arrange. I once had a teacher who was what I call the touchy-feely type. And so she arranged for everybody to sit around in class and share their, oh, police. The class was never the same. No, it was never the same. It was an act of self-destruction. Well, everybody should be able to take whatever's dished out. Yeah, that's right. Which translates, everybody should be able to take what I dish out. So, what you do is you ask, when I open my mouth, or when I draw a picture, whatever else it is, what will be the consequences on the lives of the people in my environment? And if it causes great damage, then I don't do it. If I undermine people's survival, people's sense of dignity, whatever else, then I what? I don't do it. The consequences decide. All right. So now let's look at some of the realities in the world. That is, they become the parameters of the consequences. There are very few secular Muslims in the world. There's one in, and I know another one up in Boston. Got the number? I mean, I can count them. We don't have enough time to, although we may have enough time. I don't know. Okay, fine. And in fact, you hear them. They write in the newspapers. And some of them are outraged by the rioting and whatever else it be. It doesn't make any difference. Their influence over the Muslim masses is nil. They write for us, and we pay them. 2, the Muslim world is controlled by a powerful clergy now, increasingly. And this clergy does not understand what we mean by free speech, because to tolerate either heresy or blasphemy is unacceptable. And in fact, there isn't equality. Since we possess the truth and you do not, what? There cannot be equality. And again, I don't get too self-righteous because I believe I have the truth about tobacco and the smokers don't. That's it. The third is that Islam is expanding. Expanding means it's moving into Europe and into North America. So the confrontation now is becoming what? Even more intense, because the people who are most outraged are the people living in the middle of this secular liberal culture, which is annoying to the people who live there and created it. I mean, this is ours. You're going to tell us to shut up? There's an expanding fundamentalism. And in fact, there is an increasing sense of outrage on the part of Muslims in the Western world, the immigrants. They should be grateful, but they are what? They are outraged. Have you ever tried to lecture people on their feelings? You shouldn't be angry. I know. You shouldn't. Shouldn't. You shouldn't be outraged. Oh, I shouldn't be. It's beyond rationality. They are. And in fact, when outraged, they go stampeding around the place, burning down embassies, who knows what. There is now in the Muslim world, and increasingly in the Western world, social disorder that comes from cultural conflicts, okay? And in fact, in the Detroit area, we had this white-black conflict, which hasn't gone away. The zoo has only what? has only revived it. So you have to be very careful. Can Brooks Patterson say, well, put the council in the zoo? No. If you're trying to influence public opinion, no. If you're trying to influence public opinion in Detroit, see, there we are. That's right. It's my right. Idiots, put them in the zoo. No, I mean that feeds right into their hands. I mean that becomes an accusation of what? Racism. You're applying, we're monkeys. You're going to put us as monkeys. That's what somebody said from the city council. So we all learn to what? We're walking on eggshells. Do you understand that? We're all what? That's what this cultural confrontation, it won't go away. We're all walking on eggshells. So, one of the realities is that it's very easy to provoke, in particular because oppressed people who tend to be very religious. The more poverty, the more religion, can be easily, do you understand? Easily provoked. The issues now become things attached to their religion and their religious beliefs. And in Europe, it has consequences because since their numbers are increasing, they have political power. You need them, maybe, to win an election. So now, in order to dramatize this whole thing, I want to talk about secular limitations. If you go to Germany, There's a law. You may not publish an anti-Semitic book in Germany. And I must say that most of my liberal friends never opened their mouth against it. Is that not a restriction of free? No, is it not a restriction of free speech? Yeah, right. In Austria, there is a law, as there is in Germany, against denying the Holocaust. You cannot. So David Irving, who just wrote this thing, he was arrested and put in jail for 3 years. Was there much of a peep from the liberals?
No, we liked it.
That's right. Everybody has his own list of the people who should be shut up. Right. And in fact, so there are the Austrians saying, we are so sorry for what happened. We're not going to allow anybody on our territory, do you understand, to publish that thing because this is a very volatile world with increasing anti-Semitism, and quite frankly, we're not going to allow that thing. Then there are the women with pornography. Do you remember that? The feminists? Very big, about 10 years ago. Right. You remember, Esther, right? Women, liberationists, arch-liberals, who believe that female pornography humiliates women, and therefore putting the bodies of naked women on billboards is to deprive women, of their dignity. And therefore they are opposed to female pornography. Whoa! Is that okay? Yes, you can do that. And the last, we have it in this country, in some places. You can't publish, or in other countries, racist literature because too much harm is caused by it. It's like publishing pro-tobacco literature. Too much harm is caused by it. So we have all these secular causes where we're perfectly willing to limit freedom of speech because it causes social harm or social disorder. And in fact, many of the people who were screaming against the Muslims protesting the cartoons, they would approve of some of these restrictions. Now, that would mean that anti-Semitic cartoons could not be published in the Arab world. If it applied, do you understand? Would that be a limitation of free speech? Yes. Would that be a good thing? Most likely. No. Given the social environment, do you understand? The inflammatory character of the social environment, most likely it would be good. Do you think deniers of the Holocaust should lose the right to publish? I mean, there used to be this big controversy. The ACLU championed Nazis marching in Skokie. Do you remember this? Yeah. So there are the Holocaust survivors. No, they're standing, and the Nazis are going by, and people are saying, well, you ought to be strong enough. Well, are there no limitations? So now I'm going to offer guidelines. You thought I wasn't, right? One, I think we should champion free speech. Of course. And, of course, it is for the social good from the consequential point of view. John Stuart Mill said this in On Liberty. If we're going to have a dynamic society with innovation, then we have to have free speech. Otherwise, we're not going to have a dynamic society with innovation, and that's good for us. 2, when we exercise free speech, we are always aware of the consequences. We never go into a situation saying, I have the right. Somebody said to me the other day, this friendship broke up. She said, you know, we're very good friends, and what does it mean, good friends, if you can't tell the other person exactly what you're thinking and feeling? No. Idiot. All right. The third is we have realistic expectations. Realistic expectations is we recognize that changing people will take a long time. I, by the way, do not doubt that ultimately the culture of globalization, which is fairly secular, will prevail because the goodies are too attractive. But I think that it will take decades and decades and decades to convert the Muslim world to it. So realistic expectations is we don't shout at people and say, you ought to be in stage 12 now when they're in stage what? Stage 1. Like asking a baby, do you understand? Stand up. All right. 4, I believe in self-censorship. I mean, if the Jutland Post wants to publish the cartoons, fine. But quite frankly, I wouldn't organize a contest. It may be that Ahmedi, do you understand? I wouldn't organize a contest to offend, to test the limits. Why would I do that? What social good is produced by it? I don't know what social good is produced by it. What social good is produced by doing Holocaust cartoons? The Jutland Post said, well, I'll publish all the Holocaust cartoons that Ahmadinejad in Iran can find. What's the point? What's the point of just provoking? It's my right. It's not your moral right to provoke when it promotes what? Social disorder, right. Useless social disorder. Now, you have to make a distinction. When you're a filmmaker in Holland and you're producing a film about Muslim women and their oppression, which could lead to public awareness, you understand, of their plight, and there's excitement or resistance, then indeed you have to applaud the person who has the courage to what? To do it. But if all you're trying to do is offend and test how much you can offend, what's the point? I mean, ultimately, the only cure will be the Muslim world needs 2 things. It needs institutions of secular education, which do exist, but in very small number, and it needs a new clergy. A clergy that most likely would be trained in Europe or North America and then go to the Muslim world. A clergy that has experienced what we would call the values of a secular liberal culture in the same way that modern rabbis or modern ministers or modern priests have, all right? But that takes time, and that would take investment of money and so forth. That's how you do it. But you can't ask them to be in stage 12 when they're in stage 1, and you haven't provided them with the means even of changing and altering their culture, which means there will be unevenness in this whole process. We will censor ourselves when they don't. They'll say vile and terrible things. They won't censor themselves. But we will. Well, but I do want to tell you that if we exercise some levels of self-censorship, if all we want to do is provoke, then it will have an effect on the what? On the other side. So no, we don't want laws preventing free speech. We want citizens who use their common sense. So I didn't applaud the cartoons. Do they theoretically have the right? Yes. Should they have done it? Most likely, no. Do I applaud the people who are burning down embassies? No. Would I like to diminish, do you understand their provocation? The answer is yes. Well, if you have any delicious cartoons you'd like to show me, please come up and see me after the program is over. Thank you so much for coming this morning.